So what I'm going to do is just kind of a whirlwind tour of this area, which did exist really as a sector per se. Brant was one of the founders of INN in 2009. At the time, there were 27 members. They were all investigative, and pretty much that was it. When you talked about nonprofit news, some of them had been out there a while, but that was it. So today, we believe there are more than 250, probably closer than to 270 nonprofit news organizations around the country in the U.S. There are more internationally. So what you're really looking at is a growth of 10 times in 8 years in the momentum of people founding these things. And we literally get numerous calls every week from people investigating starting up news organizations. Not all of them end up being nonprofits, but you're seeing a similar growth on the for-profit independent side. INN itself is a network of about 145 of these. They all do original reporting. They agree to editorial independence policies and are transparent about their funding. And that's, that growth has tracked the membership overall. To give you a sense from these origins in investigative reporting, they're now about 25% local, about 30% state and regional, and about 38% national and global. These are US based, but that's either the scope of their coverage or their audience. So you're seeing this diversify in INN, which started as the investigative news network, became the Institute for Nonprofit News as a network a few years ago to reflect that. About 30% of these are topic specific. So you see deep concentrations in the complex public affairs topics: health, education, environment, a lot of social justice, criminal justice, equity issues. How they make money. There are really 8 routes that they are using in 8 paths. One is services. Many do training, many do things that are on the edges of journalism to fund that reporting. There are studio models. Many of them, particularly the more investigative or deep expertise, are pursuing commissioned work, or they're specialists and they're reaching their audience primarily through other media and some non-media. Many syndicate and distribute. That may be paid or it may be free. They tend to start with grants and major donor money as seed funding. Many of them are still very reliant on foundation funding and grants, but I think they are all trying to diversify and have had varying degrees of effort around that. As you move more toward B2C models, many are making significant amounts of money off the forms of advertising that are more sponsorship or underwriting related. They aren't programmatic. They're more akin to the type of sponsorship and advertising you see in public media, the other big pot of nonprofit news. Events is a fast-growing area of both revenue and audience development. And finally, reader revenue, which we've talked about. That can take kind of 3 forms. Membership is big, but also some publications find just sustaining donors rather than a formal membership program is more successful. And then some do have subscription products and or paywalls. In that evolution, I started and went from kind of business to business to business to consumer. Mm-hmm. They all start in the middle with that grant or usually a major donor who gives them enough to launch. And then they tend to move in one direction or the other. One of the things happening in the industry is that many of them are trying to move in both directions, and they're tiny, so that's really hard. And so you see a lot of experimentation, and then they kind of feel their way, and that's a lot of our work now, is helping them figure out which strategic direction do you want to take your revenue. The things that make nonprofit news organizations different than for-profit tend to be the mission-driven aspect of their work. They tend to be more highly invested in the type of news that is the most expensive to produce in terms of reporting time and the least commercial. So if you're doing a lot of First Amendment requests and you take a major role in that in your community, that doesn't always equate to any product or anything that makes money. They're very investigative, deep beat coverage, really, truly expertise in their coverage. And then finally, a cluster of things. Many of them are trying to cover news in and for very underserved communities where income is very low, and to be inclusive in that, or they're highly community-centered and very based in community engagement, but haven't, in a way that revenue doesn't accrue to it. Basically, what you're seeing here is the embodiment of an economic shift of news in some markets from a commercial good to a public good.
Yeah.
So this type of news reporting is becoming akin to your library or your public parks and so forth. And so when they're going to the community, they do make money, they do need to run as businesses, very much so. They're very entrepreneurial, but they're seeking community support on that basis of it as a public good.
Good.
That's the quick tour.
You've all worked with a lot of nonprofits, and Sue, as you just described it, this is a public good. And we've seen as the business model fell apart, a lot of foundation money flowing in, and foundation money really trying to figure out what it's supposed to do to sustain stuff. I know Brant and I had an email conversation about it, and you were talking in that conversation about the need to understand that these are probably going to be public goods and need funding other than earned income for a long time or permanently. I have a kind of partial view of this, and I'm wondering how you see it. Is the nonprofit funding community, largely foundations, are they understanding this? This is now 2017, and is this a long-term commitment for a public good, specifically in investigative reporting, and then we can take it more widely?
I think the foundations are coming around to the realization that if we could replace donations with earned income,
Yeah.
we would have done it, and we would have started as for-profits. But that doesn't mean that all the nonprofits shouldn't be encouraged to figure out how to bring in some earned
certainly, yeah.
income
Yeah.
and steadier income and more reliable.
You have a
but-
formula? You say like you would hope that these would get 25% or 50% over time, or?
I think it really varies. We've had discussions where really there were some program officers that thought we should stop bothering them and just go make money. I think 15 or 20% is pretty ambitious at this point.
Yeah.
And especially at the smaller newsrooms. And one thing I wanted to add is I don't think we've hit the second stage thoroughly enough of where we really do have a network that is supporting itself with other members. Sue and I discussed that. She's got, various views on it. But I do think that we don't have the smaller newsrooms, nonprofit newsrooms, working together well enough with others where they have similar interest. And in fact, in a couple of
Good,
instances, I've seen people kind of recede back into the old ways, like, I'm competitive and I'm not going to share with you. And so I think that's our next hurdle in all of this. And it has big business implications, too.
I want to come back to that point. And sharing is not exactly in our DNA, I'd say, journalism. For Crystal, I know you work with a lot of universities and foundations too, I would imagine. How do you see that same question? How do you see them seeing the need to support journalism as a good? And are they wavering? I want the names from Brant of the program officers that are telling you to go away so we can publicize them, but probably won't get them. Are you seeing, is it harder? Is it easier in 2017?
For universities or for nonprofits to work with journalism companies, you put it right. So I'm the executive director of academic affairs at Aussie Media, and so I got a question earlier. Did Aussie change its model, its business model? And I have to say, Ken kind of got it right. So with the education, we're sort of right there in the middle. With journalism, I'd say that universities are open. They're becoming more open. Also, schools are also becoming more open. And also, even nonprofits are supportive and open for journalism and for journalism entities. So that's all really progressing, I would say, in the last a couple of years or so.
And
It's
so
really,
you've seen a change, actually more openness. I think there's a wider understanding of the decline of journalism, of the journalism business and what it's meant.
absolutely.
Finally, right? So you're seeing that. Well, Sue, what do you think? I mean, you deal with a lot of foundations, and a lot of your members deal with a lot of foundations. Are you feel sanguine about that? Are they more open now, or is it?
I think there are more foundations looking at this space because news is not listed as one, an IRS category
Right.
of nonprofits. So they generally are listed as education, sometimes public affairs, sometimes culture and arts.
Might want to get a little closer to the microphone there.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So, but they weren't traditionally thought of by many foundations. So you do have the journalism foundations such as Knight that have been there a long time, but now you are seeing foundations that don't work primarily in journalism paying more and more attention. They often are seeing journalism as a means to their goal of picking up democratic activity among, encouraging voting and involvement in the democracy. Oftentimes they are interested in a topic area and have seen coverage disappear. So that's where those verticals and those public
And so
affairs
that brings up
topics
also
comes
the
in.
question of impact. And I remember that CIR was one of the earliest leaders in impact. So if you're running a for-profit business and you say, what's the metrics? Well, what's your circulation? What's your revenue? What's your profit? That kind of stuff. And in the nonprofit world, when those aren't your goals, the question has been, are you improving the local democracy? And and it's a squishier question.
Yeah, right.
Are we making progress in being able to gauge the impact of both the topical organizations, the investigative work, the local news?
I think so, yeah.
Please describe how.
Yeah, I would say a couple of things. I think the impact tracker that CIR created, there's a platform called Mori that was software development by an organization called Chalkbeat, and then other organizations are just tracking, standard metrics of distribution and audience engagement. So you can see that. Where it becomes harder is all the nonprofits that distribute through other media, it's very hard to track that use.
Right.
Some of them attach a pixel, but it tends to get scraped off. We're looking at using meltwater incision to maybe track some of that. So people are piecing that together. So you can kind of get reach, you can kind of get engagement. I think what nobody's captured well is that the impacts of news often are spread over years.
Right.
And so.
Yeah, it's not like capturing a click.
Yeah, it can take, pulling a thread on one story may lead to somebody going to prison, but it's 4 years later and after all kinds of incremental coverage.
I don't want to be too glib about the foundation program officers. I was talking about the early days.
Sure.
And what I think has happened is there's been a real education in what it takes when you have a totally disrupted industry
Yeah.
like we do to come along.
Yeah.
And I think there's been less pressure on the earned income. So I think we've made headway, and especially in foundations that haven't dealt with journalism before. There's been an education, not only the nonprofit newsrooms on how to exist, but also with the foundations. And the other thing I wanted to say is I think the nonprofit newsrooms have enough stature now that they need to make better business deals with for-profit newsrooms.
Yeah.
Their branding or their name is getting lost in the distribution system. They're supplying an enormous amount of important content that does drive a lot of audience to other news sites. So I think that's another stage that we have to get through.
And what you're describing there, and it's interesting, it's come up a couple different ways, and same thing with universities. There's a new ecosystem, really, of how news is being produced, how it's being distributed, how it's being recognized, but it's not really a system. There are parts of the system there. And the way I take in, and I know a number of the groups that are in INN, and that split is really interesting, local, national, and topical. They're largely supplemental, although some of them are the leaders in their area, like criminal justice, for instance, or environment or health. But they're largely supplemental, and the distribution happens a lot through major media. The idea of how we kind of say this is the new normal, that you've got X number of people, and I'll ask you for the number in a minute, X number of people in this system that's outside old news media, and how we say this is now a permanent feature, helping with the funders. How do we do that? That seems to be a really big question, because it's really hard for anybody to see exactly how it works, or that this is a new system which is going to help get news on both local news, health news, whatever, to readers.
I think there are a whole bunch of issues.
Yeah.
That you surfaced
I'm sure you're in the middle of them.
A couple things. I think they are niche, and they've developed niche audiences, and
Yeah.
the successful ones are. There are only a few instances where they've really gone from being niche to the primary news publication in their area. Vermont Digger, VT Digger, is one of them. Started as very tiny niche. It's now the biggest news media in that state and has astonishing penetration.
And when
in
you say
Vermont.
biggest, how do you measure that?
Both in the size of their newsroom, and they're reaching basically a third of the state population reads them regularly every month. And that's of the total population. It's only like 600,000. So
Yeah,
Vermont's
sure.
like a city state.
Sure.
That's how I think of it. A very rural city state.
City-state.
It's kind of like the
but-
Vatican, but not the Vatican.
Right, right. But, the only thing close is the public media newsroom, really, in Vermont, also has built up and has good reach. But that's unusual. Most of them remain a niche in focusing either a type of news or public affairs news or a specific topic. And I think that'll continue for some time. I think the trick is that many of them were rewarded by foundations and were built on third-party distribution by traditional media.
Yeah.
And that's now plummeting, and some of the traditional media that were paying them don't have the ability and or willingness to pay. So there's an issue around branding. Some are trying to build their own audience. Others that are distributed via third party are looking for newer platforms, and we have a whole project around that. So getting them on newer platforms, insisting on branding, even if they are foundation funded and contribute their news for free, to make sure that that's tracked. And
So it's a
build
straddle
branding
to some
over
degree
time.
too, about how much they're going to be destinations and how much they're going
Yeah.
to feed into the old system. And
Yes.
it seems like a really live question at this
A
point.
very live question, very live. I think that'll be a huge part of their business development work over the next few years.
Yeah, I don't think the nonprofit newsrooms have embraced the mobile technology that's out there yet, simply because many are so small.
Yeah.
That's a real area we can also get into, and that would establish a more one-to-one contact with audience. But at this point, it's not there yet.
What do you see in terms of the embrace of technology and the kind of things we're talking about this morning, and the people that you work with?
Well, definitely. So platform and product, people first, of course, we talk about, type of audience is number one to focus on. But technology is the way forward. The Internet of Things is going to be pivotal in this instance. Data science, analytics, those are all things that are available to us today. And I think, when you start looking at, nonprofits that have often, passion-centered direction, then you're getting into a group of people that are able to rally niche audiences, and from that niche audience, they can further develop their value and the proposition value, which means that they'll have to innovate. And so that gives them a lot of room for growth, particularly in this sector where there is interest that they can leverage. So
Good.
they're definitely embracing
So here's one thing I wonder about this. I know there's a news revenue hub out there coming out of San Diego. There are more smarter collaborative processes going on saying we need to work together, we need to use the best technology. And to me, it's akin to what I said this morning, that you've got these national models where these companies have it figured out. You do great journalism, you have great analytics people, you have state-of-the-art technology, smart sales programs, and hopefully a little money to get you the next 2-3 years. Essentially, it's figured out. Local newspapers haven't, for all kinds of, largely haven't been able to do that or haven't done it. And then we've got this group here, several hundred now, who are all mission-oriented. They know what they're doing. They're the clearest people about what matters in terms of journalism. If I could snap my fingers, right, I would say, okay, we got that figured out at the top. How do you take that system of analytics, distribution, content you've got, and put it together instead of what I see happening, and it may be unfair, is foundations give money constantly to create new collaborations, but we just need a platform that is a full-featured platform. What am I missing here in why we can't get there faster given the news emergency?
I think part of it is the size of a lot of companies. I think that what makes some companies a little bit more malleable is because they're more entrepreneurial and they can, sort of start up. That almost anything's possible, the sort of Silicon Valley-esque type of news journalism that's populating right now. And so, when you have a larger, more traditional structures, a more nimble approach is more difficult.
I think there's a lot of truth to what Crystal said. We see the organizations do not have scale, and often they are small enough that just implementing and executing is challenging. On the other hand, they can move fast, and they will, and they will try something, and particularly at the local and state level, they'll try it. If it doesn't work, they're not the least bit hesitant. They don't invest in the long run. They're like, oh, that completely stunk. We're trying this now. And so you see this rapid experimentation. A lot of it doesn't work, but then they'll land on things that do. And so the organizations that find something that do, you'll see them really progress quickly. It was striking to me in something we were doing. We work with the Trust Project, which is based out at Santa Clara University, and they went to non-journalists, discovered what regular people see in news presentations that make them either trust or distrust a story, and we're helping them make that usable across many sites. So we were by far the tiniest organization in there, and then there was BBC and The Guardian, Washington Post, BuzzFeed, Vice, I think, in there. And so when it went to actually implement, they were, far and away in their tech sophistication, but they are still working it up the corporate chain. Whereas we said right after with Trust Project, we were like, well, do you want to test it? We could do like 30 sites next week.
Right. Yeah, you move
because
fast,
the
right?
little ones were like, yeah, we'll try it. They don't have much to lose. There's no corporation above them. And it was just stunning, the difference in
you
that.
could move.
So
Brant,
I
what do
think
you
that's
think?
an
What's
advantage.
on your wish list with all the work that you've done to be able to stabilize, solidify this? What is there infrastructure that's needed? What would you like to see happen?
I said earlier, I think we're still struggling with a distribution system that favors these nonprofit newsrooms. It's not like we haven't had some models out there. If you had AP or you have NPR, PBS, and there's just a lot of different reasons. And that's what I was saying. The hurdle to me is to have a distribution system that's mobile phone based. And it has clearly, if you want to find out what's really going on in a particular topic or story, that this is where you go, where you really get the in-depth reporting, independent reporting, et cetera. And that's sort of my vision, that people would be willing to subscribe to a constant feed of having different things coming in. And I think sometimes we underestimate our audience's ability to be interested in more than one thing. And I think, and we end up in a bubble from the news side, not just from a Google algorithm creating a bubble. I think sometimes we're trying to put people into bubbles. And so I really think if we open up a little bit more, that would be my hope.
And you could see a subscription product off of the combination of this?
That's one thing I've thought about. I mean, when we started this in
It's an
2008,
interesting idea.
2009. Some of us saw this network of nonprofits as a bridge to the next business model, to the shore of the next business model.
Yeah.
And it appears more and more that the bridge is the shore. So we're still trying to, so we're still trying to do that. But, I'm watching how I'm getting news. Everyone else is getting news off their mobile phone. We need to have a significant presence there, and because we're reliable and we care about what we do.
I'm wondering from that, I think that's a very interesting idea. And if you look at this, if reader revenue is going to be the main source, and you're providing a lot of content, which is driving engagement, another way to do it might be to get a revenue share of a subscription. So that you could actually count how much content is being read. If 8% of the content being read is from, these other sources, you can make a case for revenue share.
I see that a little differently. I think reader
Yeah.
revenue is going to be very significant, but the organizations that have done most with it, like Voice
Yeah.
of San Diego and others, it ends up being about 20-25% of their revenue. The big part of reader revenue for virtually all nonprofits, and I think this will be true for the news organizations too, is coming from major donors. So it's a little different than the subscription individual.
Well, and for the nonprofits and nonprofits coming out of the public radio model, call it membership. Right, and it is voluntary usually, because almost all this content is free and open on the web, right? How is membership progressing? And I know it's part of the Voice of San Diego model. Maybe describe, and I know Crystal, you have ideas there too. Describe Voice of San Diego for people and how that kind of developed into the revenue hub and the ideas around membership.
Yeah, the Voice of San Diego is a daily publication. It's built heavily on the franchise of their editor, who's well-known in town. They have about 20-25% of their revenue comes from membership, and their publisher, Mary Welter Brown, had taken that and developed a revenue hub that kind of is a news version of the kind of nonprofit software that you'll see out there from Blackbaud or others. So she is helping organizations across the country develop membership programs. There are many others that have been doing it on their own, and that is now a growing part and kind of one of the basics of what they're doing.
In San Diego, membership is about what percentage of their revenue, do you think?
Well, for Voice of San Diego, I believe Mary said it's 20 now, and they're going for 25%. For iNewsSource, which is a strong investigative news organization in the same town in San Diego, they're about 60% locally supported, but it's much more major donor.
Yeah.
And I don't know on the public television station there, honestly, what that split is. So what's happening is, like, in each location, people are figuring out what's that mix. Is it individual donors? Is it major donors? Is it local foundations?
Well,
Is
it's
it
a
events?
combination.
Right.
But I'm wondering how much membership can be pushed. As people, we've seen the subscription surges, mainly national, some local. And I think Jeff made the point, especially about millennials, that they're mission-driven. It's more than transactional. The idea of we're doing this for the community. Is membership, and let me ask Crystal and Brant, you see that as a significant thing that's growing and we're kind of understanding it better, or is it kind of stuck at a low level?
So definitely membership subscription often really directs our products and different platforms in which people, which different journalism, companies can reach out and connect with a different base. Also, the membership really can help really define an outfit better. That can also give us direction into, where are we going forward? What's the bridge or is this the shore? So membership really is a vital thing. And so getting data from that, really realizing, who the space is that's subscribing, to any given product or however they are relating on whatever platform. That's all important.
It gives them a direct connection and data.
Well, and something that's not quite as lofty is membership provides a steady stream of
Right.
revenue. When I was running investigative reporters and editors, it was nice to know throughout the year you had certain funds coming in. I think one of the hardest things for the smaller nonprofit newsrooms is sort of the cash flow, where you get a spike with a foundation grant or a
Right.
large donor, and then everything plunges for a while. It's sort of like you're riding the waves up and
Right.
down. And so one thing I think everybody's struggling with is, okay, where can we know we're going to get something every quarter coming in, every 3 months, something that's steady?
Yeah, I'm wondering whether there is. I'm thinking about the campaign, the 2016 campaign, and how I tend to get more blue emails than red. But Act Blue, for instance, as an umbrella group. So the idea, I don't know if there's any place where, and there is plenty of money in America, if people said, oh, I want to support this stuff, but I don't know what I want to support. Is there an umbrella that people can go to that would let them support these organizations?
They now, just through the work of Knight, Democracy Fund, and MacArthur, have put up a $3 million matching pool for end of year. And we just launched newsmatch.org, and then that'll come over to the INN site that's a directory. So people can give, and they
That's
see,
great.
they can find the newsroom they want to give to, but then it'll surface others by their state, by topic. And so we hope that
Is that up?
lifts
Is
the
that up
recognition.
now?
It is up.
Newsmatch.org.
Yeah.
Go and contribute. So
If everybody here gave something by the end of the day, would that be helpful?
that'd be great.
And if anybody is live streaming, you have to give as
And
well.
what's interesting on Newsmatch is it's aimed at individual donors.
You can do it on your phones right now.
Yeah, the
Thanks, Ken.
the goal is to increase the individual donors and possibly members
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
subscribers by doing that. So this is really trying to nudge everybody to get those individual relationships
Yeah.
going.
That's
You're
great.
really talking about an underlying cultural change from news being free, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit.
Right.
News being free to something a community needs to support. Could be a whole
Yeah, I think it's
lot of
interesting.
different ways to
You're
do that.
absolutely right. It is cultural, and it is on that level transactional. As I've looked at, I was talking about Scroll, for instance, up there, and I was talking with Tony Hale about that at some length, talked with Cosmin about it in Later Pay, this question of friction. So let's say you cross that cultural bridge, we're back on the bridge here, and you may be stuck on the bridge, but you're on the bridge and you say, yeah, I mean, I'm really concerned about, pick a topic at this point. I want to support somebody who's doing good reporting there. There are tens of millions of people who are potential to do that. They don't know about newsmatch.org, and the friction of it's not nothing is as easy as an Apple purchase here or an Amazon purchase as one click. So I've come to believe, especially from these later talks, that while there's a whole bunch of things here, and it's a cultural change and earned income and this and that, some part of this is just like make it easy for people to give money, and especially at this time, people are willing to do it. And so I hope we can make progress on that. I want to open it up. I have more questions, but I want whatever time it really is.
You have 10.
Is this 2017 up here?
I'm not sure. Questions for this group about membership model. One thing that
Membership,
strikes
any
me,
part of this.
one thing that strikes me, and we all organizations talk about quality journalism. Like we want to be able to create the opportunity to create quality journalism, and yet we all want to do it ourselves as news organizations, right? And it struck me as you were talking about partnerships, you're doing quality journalism. And I know that sometimes people want exclusivity or they want whatever, they want to own that, and maybe that costs a little bit more, but maybe riff on that just a little bit more. That seems to me to be when newsrooms are hemorrhaging staff, especially senior staff that Ken talked about earlier, and the ability to know a problem, to really have that experience, that seems like a sweet spot for everyone to win if they will patch into that. Do you think that major organizations are aware of that to the level they need to be, perhaps?
Yes and no. Interestingly, we've seen a pretty big change following the last election in that we've heard from, The Guardian, other big national and international publications that said, we don't have feet on the street off the coast. Do you have members who are throughout the country who are, really top-notch reporters who can help us? And so we've been facilitating a lot of those relationships. Some are one-to-one, and we have a project out of Chicago to increase collaboration and distribution, particularly out of the Midwest, because that news was not, there aren't as many reporters on the ground. So it is happening, but it's changing slowly. There's still, I think there is that journalistic tendency. You're going to promote what you yourself produce. But there is a willingness, and people are collaborating more on projects, and they're sharing news much more than they used to.
And I can give you an example with Aussie. So last week, we teamed up with BBC to host them in Silicon Valley. They're doing actually a world tour looking at how to minimize the gender gap. And one of the ways that they've did that is it was actually actionable. So they not only had this as a task, but they wanted us, Aussie, to host them while they were in Silicon Valley. That was their first stop. And basically bring people together in the tech world that could build an app to break the glass ceiling. So and so then at the end of the week they had the unveiling. But this is just a way of how you would have traditional very large and journalistic company teaming up with another one that's more local.
I want to say one other thing. There's no question that collaboration and sharing increased tremendously throughout the 21st century. And one thing we haven't mentioned is what's been going on globally. And the Global Investigative Journalism Network includes a lot of the INN members. And so you're seeing majorly collaborations internationally, the most famous now being the Panama Papers. I don't think anybody could have conceived of both nonprofit, for-profit journalists, 400 of them working together around the world on a particular data set, a particular data leak. And not only that, but not going first, not breaking the embargo. So that to me is a symbol of how much things have changed, and also shows the strength of this new way of doing journalism through nonprofits and through sharing and collaborating.
And I do have one more question, and that is, and Bob Sullivan's going to lead a group of freelancer journalists in a little bit. The number of mid-career journalists, seasoned folks, Ken, again, you mentioned this, who are out there. They have 25, 30 years of experience, sometimes in a community or on a beat. And for whatever reason, they may either be transitioning out of a job, whatever it might be. Is there an opportunity within INN, an organization, to harness the power and the knowledge in those communities with a match on a subject to say, hey, we're looking for people to do more investigation? Is there an opportunity there or not?
Well, part of it, I think these nonprofits, many of them have been founded by people who left traditional media. That's starting to change. We're seeing more and more founded by younger people with new models and people from outside of journalism as well. I think there is a huge opportunity, not just for INN, but there is a bubble, and that bubble's going to go away. So there's a bubble of talent. We have talked about, could you pair them with somebody who really understands current distribution strategies, digital distribution strategies, and mobile, and kind of go into some of the news deserts and create small teams to do it. Doing that at scale becomes very difficult, but so I think we're looking at, are there pilot places to do that? Many of the nonprofits do use a lot of freelance help, but very, very, high quality reporting. So some of that is happening already.